We met Konn Lavery in 2017 when he was promoting his newest horror novel, See Me. While he may have known where and when this book would fit among his Macrocosm timeline, we thought of it as just an opportunity to welcome this Canadian indie author, knowing he was going to be a shining star in a crowded sky. Some 4 years and 7 books later, Konn has come back to Go Indie Now, and no matter the genre, the subject, Konn has kept that light brightly shining, and that timeline moving and growing. As we celebrate his 10th release and shine the spotlight on Rave. By my accounts, this is your 10th release. Is that correct?
Yeah, book number 10.
And what I found kind of ironic in reading the description of this book, because I haven't read it, but reading the description, that there is a forelearning of a 10th anniversary. Was that kind of a coincidence that the 10th book and the 10th anniversary of a situation was kind of together in this?
I think it was maybe on a subconscious level or something, because I for some reason I've always had it in my head. After the 10th book, it's time to like reevaluate stuff just to see where everything's at, and I guess that's kind of what happened.
Nice. Is there anything new or different in writing this book that you learned from previous books?
Oh yeah, big difference. I guess the big one would be it's all in present tense, so it's like, yeah, that was a big change from how everything I've written before has always been past tense. Just it's a more common way of writing, and then I decided to try something different to give this one more urgency, like when you're reading it as the reader. And yeah, I tried a lot of different writing techniques with this because there are so many variations and drafts with this one that I've scrapped and overhauled and changed. So it's I'd say next to the fantasy book, it's the hardest book I've written. The fantasy one, it only is because it took 14 years. But this is the hardest one I've written.
That's interesting. I mean, after 10 books, you'd think it would get easier, right?
Yeah, no, every book seems to have their own troubles and their own challenges that you have to figure out, and whether it's research or piecing characters together, or maybe the idea just needs a complete overhaul.
The 90s is a fond time period, I would assume, for you, though. So was that kind of helpful in putting it in a time loop that you kind of were familiar with already? And settings that you're probably familiar with, too.
Yeah, the setting and the time. I mean, I was born right on 1990, so like I was a very little kid, but grew up listening to all sorts of strange music thanks to my brother, and the time period seemed to fit nicely to tell that 80s slasher style story without introducing smartphones, because that completely overhauled that subgenre where most people can just call for help now. Or videotape the problem. So yeah, like it creates a
put it on TikTok.
Yeah. That's why I think you see a lot more slashers take place in that time period, or these new ones, they tend to have some sort of digital component.
Tell everybody a little bit about Seth. What's he like, and what did you like about writing him?
Seth was a completely different character from what I've written in the past. So I really enjoyed getting to know him because I got to play off of their negative emotions for different reasons, where they're more about insecurity and being intimidated and scared, where some of the other characters I've written have had a much more external, outward anti-hero persona about them, where they inflict their problems onto other people, where Seth tends to internalize a lot of the problems. So you get a lot of his internal monologue of justifying why he behaves the way he does, why he gets into consumption abuse, or just kind of beats around a dead horse with when he should just deal with his problems.
April digs her face into Seth's chest. I'm so scared. Joel, Seth. Joel. Seth holds her tighter. Life is strange. He should be more upset about Joel's death. Hell, Dimitri's too. He had a major crush on the guy, but nothing. Zip. Nada. Seth is stone cold. The fast-thinking hero morphing back into the liquor saint. Even without his holy water to give the suffering souls, he can provide soothing words to ease the mind. The girl needs him. Seth does care for her as a friend. A friend. She needs comfort. Real friends help each other out when one is in need. To Seth, that can mean sex, talking, or protection. In this case, it's comfort. They're friends. April's crying ramps up again. The tears and other face liquids, snot and saliva, are soaking into Seth's shirt. She needs to let it all out. It is healthy to cry, for it shows strength of your character. Holding it all in makes you look dense. Why did he have to go? April cries. I don't know, Seth says, seeing her damp face. He uses his spare hand to stretch up his shirt, up to her cheeks, wiping the liquid away. No, please, you're being silly, April says, sniffling. You really saved us back there. I didn't, Seth says. Yeah, you and Dimitri before... This whole night is fucked. Is it even real? I keep asking myself the same thing. Seth reaches into his back pocket for a smoke, bringing it to the embers and then puffing it. April rests on his shoulder, taking the drag from him. The two pass it back and forth, the adult soother. It works wonders when you're stressed. April exhales, smoking, saying, This is going to haunt me for a long time. Ditto. That was Joel. I didn't treasure him with the time I had. Come on, don't talk like that. It's true, we weren't exactly together the way I wanted, but he said we were on different waves, that's all. Seth strokes her hair. I said, don't talk like that. No disrespect to him, but those words messed you up for a while. I know, but I did something tonight that would have upset him. Like what? I made out with a guy at the rave to piss him off. Well, looks like Seth isn't the only guy in April's life, minus Joel. Then again, it's no big deal. Seth was going after Dimitri. He wanted to score both the Rave King and April tonight. Sounds like April wanted to get wild too. Who knows where the night could have taken them? Maybe it could have been Seth's first orgy. Too late.
Do you feel like there's a little bit more of Seth in you than there has been in other characters in the past?
I think he does pull some influence from my younger days of like high school and junior high, and it's that kind of cliche finding your own skin essentially, where you just don't know who the hell you are and you're fighting. And Seth was actually, I think he's the first character I've written that was bi, so that was a fun kind of change on things, where I've written female protagonists, so they would have an attraction to a guy, but having a guy that kind of flip-flops, where that's part of his extra complication too, where he just can't figure out his own life, but then he's not even sure who he likes, and he just has all these extra layers of complexities that are all internal. Yeah, that's what made him a lot of fun.
You know, you're a big music guy. For people who don't know, you're a musician. You've released albums.
Arguing with each other isn't actually radical at all. It's very conformist, actually.
You're big into the concert scene. You're very varied in your musical tastes as well, and you know, you like creating soundtracks for these books, and you do so through the audiobook, and then also as a separate thing, you offer soundtracks for them. You've probably been around the rave culture. You've probably known about raves and things of that nature, but was there something new or something that you didn't know that you were kind of fascinated that you've discovered in doing research and kind of putting this as a backdrop to a story?
Yeah, I think the time period was a big indicator, because the raves that I'm more familiar with in music, it tends to be in the 2000s and 2010s where I was just legally able to go. But I have friends that have gone to these 90s raves where they were underground and you had to get like the ticket from some phone number and you didn't know until the day of where to pick it up, and because you just couldn't get caught from the cops, and it would be all in some weird warehouse where people bring their own booze and they smoke inside because you could smoke inside. And that was an interesting aspect to learn, just some of the technical sides of running these raves, and the risks were so much bigger where now everyone just gets sponsored by Red Bull or something. So there's a much more grittiness to it and mystique, which I think creates a more fun environment for a story.
Certainly ratchets up the tension for you too, as a thriller, crime writer / horror writer. Kind of helps with that aspect of it too, the kind of confusion and chaos that those things were. I mean, I remember them fondly. I grew up in the 80s, but you know.
Yeah. Yeah, it's cool because I even got to talk to, because I'm not familiar, I talked to a former RCMP officer who he's retired, but he was working around the 90s in Alberta, so he'd drive around and stuff, and not like there were any raves or anything, but he knew how they would handle procedures with like underground parties and stuff, and they'd essentially be mini raves. So he gave me a lot of insight from the flip side, from the law's perspective, on how they would handle one of those situations.
Is authenticity pretty important for you? I mean, 1993, like you said, you're very young when this takes place and everything. So, you have to research the authenticity a bit. Was that very, very important to you, though, to get that kind of make it more real? Because there's a supernatural element to this story a little bit.
Yeah, it's pretty important. Yeah, I always try to do as much research as I can to make it believable. And eventually you can go down a tricky rabbit hole where you make it you learn too much and then you try to jam it all into the book, and then story loses its flow because you're just trying to push in these facts, where if you learn just the right amount, and sometimes you do have to research a lot more and then take some stuff away to make the story have a nice flow, but convincing to people. So when they read it, they're like, yeah, you know what? I buy that.
Was there some kind of detail that you didn't know about anything around Canada that kind of surprised you?
A few, actually. One that my editor caught at the very, very end, I should have clued in, just switchblades are illegal. I don't know. It's
that's an important one, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, it's neat in movies, or you see it in books too, that some character throws out a switchblade and it's just cool looking.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh shit, you can't go and buy those.
From the soundtrack element of it, do you design the soundtrack as you're writing? Is it something you're thinking about as you're writing, or is that something that you do post writing? And how much of the soundtrack that you write to is included in what you produce and put out for the public?
It depends on the book. For this one, I totally had a compilation in mind to work with musicians again. And the last time I did that was in 2016 with Seed Me. And that one, it kind of came together after, where this one, I knew it needed a 90s sound and it needed that techno aspect of it, but it needed to be a little more hard hitting because it's horror and scary. So it couldn't just be, I don't know, like Scooter or something. It had to have a little more depth and darkness. So that kind of helped me figure out what kind of musicians I wanted to work with, who would be a good fit, who'd be willing to work on it. Man, they really knocked it out of the park and added a whole new layer to it with theatrical intensity. Because most of them grew up in the 90s too, so they understand where it's coming from.
Yeah. Did you use a lot of it while you were writing?
No, it actually came, a lot of the time it comes together after. Or I'm writing some of the tracks myself just loosely before or during like I'm writing them during I'm writing the book, so I'll be playing and recording some stuff. But the musicians haven't been brought on until later. I've asked them during while I'm writing the book, like, hey, you'd be interested in doing this? The book's about this. It's got a slasher element to it, so it's creepy, but it's got like rave techno. And then they're like, oh, cool, yeah, that's something I'd be interested in. But yeah, just the process to write the album generally ends up happening after, because I give them a scene to work with a list of moods and emotions that are accompanied with it. So that gives them a lot of flexibility to encompass just that type of emotion.
Nice. That's awesome. I love that.
Yeah, it's fun.
Yeah, it's cool. It's a cool little niche to put with writing, you know. I mean,
Yeah.
it seems so easily to go together, and I'm just surprised more people don't do it.
Yeah, I think because it's a bit of work.
Yeah, I bet.
Yeah, and I do see some authors find a better workaround rather than having to play project manager, and then yeah, they basically just do their Spotify playlists and embed them on their website. Like, that's a cool workaround, because you can get to the same idea where you're introducing people to new types of music and giving the books another media to explore for people to understand.
Yeah, that's it. You're right. That is a pretty cool workaround. You've written about you've written a story in an airport. How much of the environment and setting does it mean to your stories? Being able to utilize all of Canada's wonders and create this atmosphere that you're looking for.
It's been pretty important that stories that I've written take place in Canada. Because you just hear about it, like the Canlit has such a bad name, and it's not fair. There's a lot of cool stuff in Canada, and really messed up stuff if you start digging into actual history, which I did some for Rave, and it's like some of this stuff should be brought to light, and that's why some of the scenarios and scenes I've always made sure take place within Canada, because yeah, it's a big country despite being small compared to the US, for example, but it's still big, and a lot of weird stuff happened. During the research of Rave, I went down one of those research rabbit holes, and I learned about a group called the Squamish Five, and they were an activist group in BC, I believe in the either 70s or 80s, but they were into making bombs and stuff, and they were like ready to blow stuff up, and huge anarchists. And eventually they got busted by the RCMP, and then one of the members eventually wrote a nonfiction about her time in this group.
Whoa.
And it's just, yeah, there's all sorts of weird stuff that happens in Canada.
But good fodder for you.
Yeah, and I actually make note to that, being like specific characters in Rave were inspired by the Squamish Five.
You know, and you use the woods in this story, and obviously underground warehouses and things like that nature. You know, they already have that creepy element to them. Is that kind of what you gravitated to? Is it that you're looking for that specific element that's going to provide to enhance the story, or is it more you want to take place in one specific setting and you're working around the elements?
The whole idea kind of started with a road trip with my girlfriend and I, talking about how creepy it would be for a serial killer to be on the prairies of Alberta, and we're just, because it was just so flat, and it might have been foggy or something, but it was just creepy because there's nothing and no one around for miles, and you just see flat ground everywhere. So that's where the idea birthed, and then it mutated into being like, what would be a slasher Canadian character? I mean, you got Jason Voorhees, you got Freddy Krueger, you got Pinhead, you got all those classic guys, but like, what would a Canadian one look like? So that's where it all kind of birthed from, and that's where it kind of takes place on the west side of Alberta, where you've got the forests and you've got a little bit of mountains, but you also have the plains as well. All that takes place on Yellowhead Highway. It's just a straight highway that goes west, and that seemed to be a real good fit for the story. There's some towns in there, which Hinton is the town that most of it takes place in. So it kind of the two ended up marrying each other really well unintentionally.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Okay, so give us a character besides Seth that we should be paying attention to. Who's somebody that, without spoiling it, obviously, but so who's somebody that you really think we should keep our mind's eye on?
I'd say Tanis, who is Seth's best friend. She's pretty badass. She's got a very punk rock attitude about her and doesn't take any shit. She is also very conflicted because both of them grew up together throughout like school and up to where they're at now, and they both have, without spoiling any of it, but they have some conflict with each other, which raises interest as they're dealing with this killer who's on the loose, and they're kind of at odd ends without directly telling each other because neither one wants to hurt the other person.
So that's either so Canadian or so young.
Right? They're just too polite to say anything. Yeah, gotta love Canadians for that.
The one thing I know, and we've talked about it a little bit before, but you've really developed it now, and it's kind of this interesting. You've kind of got like this kind of comic book mentality when you're writing these books in terms of you've created this Superverse. So tell us about the evolution of the Superverse and where this book ties into the timeline.
Oh yeah. That ever since I got into writing, I've always had this idea of one super story arc that would combine everything. And even some stories I had written back in junior high and high school that will never see the light of day took place in this Superverse. And as I wrote the dark fantasy series, as I wrote Seed Me, I dropped in little things that were super subtle that I doubt anyone would have ever caught. But it was always building up on this Superverse. And even when I started doing monthly short stories on the blog, I didn't know how they were going to tie in, but I figured some way I'd make it work. And and now it's just grown into this thing where I have to be a little more cautious, which is why I had built that Wikipedia that's on my website, not only for people to enjoy, but just so I can reference stuff myself. I'm like, oh no, I better not make myself into a corner. And it's so it's been really fun building it. And now I've got enough stuff where I've been able to split into 3 sections: the fantasy, which happens before the real world era, and then a sci-fi era, which has only been short stories so far. But Rave takes place in the real world era with a few other books, and it's loosely connected with this oil company that I've been hinting at in a few books and some short stories. And it's been this looming super corporation that I have plans for in the future, where it's just this monstrous company that just engulfs and absorbs other companies until they become a very prominent evil in the grand story arc. And for Rave, it's got the oil company in it. Other than that, it's pretty isolated at the moment compared to the other stories.
And within the Superverse, you can read each book and it's completely separate from the story arcs. They're just there's just little Easter eggs and tie-ins, right? So these are all standalone in that respect.
Yeah, they are. Each one has little hints. Like for Seed Me, there's a prominent dead character right from chapter 1 named Vicky, and she was dead the whole thing in the whole story. But in Yegman, which took place I think 2 years before, you meet Vicky when she's alive. So it's just something subtle like that, and she was the side character in Yegman. And then Allen Oil Site Solution, which is the company in Rave, shows up in Seed Me, where the CEO's daughter is a primary character. So it's like weird little subtle things like that that show up, and there's hints in the fantasy one, but they aren't directly connected. The only connections that show up is in the short stories, where certain key events get explained that are obviously like, wait a minute, there's a big gap here, but not big enough that would fit in a book. So it's just a small short story to elaborate on it.
And you have it designed out. So how much of these little Easter eggs and plants do you know ahead of time you're going to put into books? Do you know that, or is it as you're writing the book and you're going, oh, this would be a good place to put the Easter egg kind of thing?
Most of the time it's it's the second where it's like, okay, this is pretty neat. I could probably throw in an Easter egg here, just kind of plant that one and inject that one. I do have a series I want to write where everything really does finally come together, where it's very clear, and the fantasy world that took place before the normal world and the normal world collide. And that's probably the next series I'll end up working on, and it'll be blatantly obvious to anyone that's followed my work then.
Nice. That's awesome. I love this concept. It's fantastic that you built this.
Thanks. Yeah, it's fun. It's neat to see it all grow together, and it's at a stage now where I really have to carefully tiptoe because there's a lot of stuff now.
Yeah, are you afraid you might get lost at points and stuff like that? Is that kind of the idea? Because you've kind of gone. You haven't gone in sequential order. You've kind of gone one way and the other way, and kind of you've written toward the end. You've written toward the beginning, and kind of dabbled in the middle. Right? That's kind of how it's gone.
Yeah, I've gone all over the place, mostly just on what would be interesting at that time to write, what's new inspiration, and then it's figuring out how to piece them together. And that's where the short stories have really helped, because they act as like stitches for some of these books. And then, putting it all together now is going to be a little trickier, but I think moving forward, the Wikipedia really helps it stay organized. And that's so I shouldn't, in theory, get myself into a corner. Hopefully I don't have to do like some Marvel reboot, go back to issue 1 or something.
We can't.
Yeah, right. Fingers crossed.
Yeah, nice. Well, I mean, it seems like you've done a pretty good job of that. I mean, See Me was one of your very first written works, so it's kind of toward the middle end of this cycle. So that's got to be interesting to kind of look at, because not only are you writing out of sequence, but you're in a different place every time you're writing, right? And do you kind of marvel at that idea that it holds together because of you're only getting better as a writer?
I think so. Yeah, and they were so vague, the connections to these different books, just because there wasn't enough material, and my writing has drastically improved. Like Rave is now 2021 and Seed Me came out in 2016, so geez, that's 5 years. And something like Seed Me, I have even considered to go back and do a second edition, which I've done for the fantasy series, and that drastically helped those. And it's something I've considered, just to clean up the writing style so everything stays in a very clean and polished writing style, because you get better as you grow as a writer.
Nice. And it's afforded you an opportunity to do different genres too, which we've talked about before, that you really like that aspect of writing, right? That you want to try so many different things. Yeah,
it's fun. It lets you explore different stuff. It probably isn't the best from a business standpoint, and that's part of why I'm saying I'm pumping the brakes a bit, where I'm like, okay, I gotta think about this properly, because I know I've confused and divided my reader base big time over the years, and it hasn't done me favors.
and they're aware of the Superverse, though? Are they?
I think the people that are following me closely have, but the people that enjoy fantasy, then they read the 4-part series, and then they're like, oh, he's just done some crime thrillers and stuff, not my thing, and they aren't even connecting the pieces because they don't care, which is fine.
Well, maybe we can help do that today here. So
yeah.